Star-Crossed World is the expansion that brought a bunch of new levels to Forgotten Land, along with increased performance on the Switch 2 for the first time 3 years after its original release. But this video has nothing to do with gameplay analysis and everything to do with the story of the brand new campaign, because this expansion has a ton of new story details which might help fill in the blanks regarding a lot of questions you might have been left with at the end of the base game. From figurine text to in-universe songs, the places where Kirby hides its world building honestly stretches across the whole game, but together they paint a cohesive picture about the people that used to live in these abandoned buildings you platform across. But while the stuff about Meteonelfilis and Lab Discoverer was interesting, even after completing the post-game and reading all the figure descriptions, I remember thinking the backstory we got seemed pretty isolated from the other games in the series. All we really got was the story of some ancient civilization on a planet we never saw before, and there was a lot of speculation online over if this one had anything to do with the ancients we heard about in other games, but with no concrete connection, there was nothing you could say for sure. Well, not anymore, because this expansion right here is the key that ties Forgotten Land not only to other games, but also to a much larger story that's been taking place in the background of the Kirby series this entire time. Don't believe me? Well, I promise that by the end of this video, I'll have you convinced, and you'll hopefully learn a bit more about Kirby lore in general, too. This video will cover not only the story of Star-Crossed World, but also theories which contain everything from time loops to forces that enabled almost every major villain from the series. As always, every game is on the table when covering lore, so if you want to play Star-Crossed World or any other Kirby game before watching this video to experience the story yourself, do that now. And without further ado, let's start setting up the pieces. Alright, let's start by getting down all the concrete details as quickly as possible. The plot of Star-Crossed World starts with a crystal meteor crashing into the ocean of the Forgotten Land, breaking apart as it falls, causing smaller comets to fall in various places across the planet. It rises back out of the ocean on a newly formed island, the Fallen Star Volcano. Visiting the island, Kirby meets astronomer Waddle Dee, who explains a legend he found in old astronomy books that were left behind on the Forgotten World. This legend claims meteors have fallen to the planet many times before, and foretells of a star of darkness that brings disaster. However, if stars of light fall along with the meteor, the disaster which will consume everything can be prevented. Upon investigating the crystals that fell along with the meteor, Kirby finds that they can transform into these little blue aliens called Starries, which can return to the meteor to reseal it in crystal. Realizing these must be the stars of light, Kirby sets off to collect the Starries from 12 different regions where the crystal comets landed. After beating these new levels and saving enough Starries, Kirby returns to the island to complete the seal. But after doing so, the meteor shatters apart, revealing something that looks a lot like a purple version of Meteonelfilis' incomplete form, Forgo. It starts absorbing the Starries around it, again in a similar way to Elfilis, chasing them up to the top of the volcano. Suddenly, the ground breaks open and Kirby falls into an underground cavern beneath the island, where he comes across a secret facility which looks a lot like Lab Discoverer, that has a few of these mysterious old pods lying around. Now this is by far the most significant detail we see in maybe the whole game, and we will be talking more about it later, but for now, Kirby finds a platform that takes him to the top of the volcano, where we finally see that purple ball transform into...
Oh no. Wait, Genwal meteorite? What did that say?
What a very Elfilis form! Crystallis, Genwal. I'm sorry, I didn't read your name. Your name is Genwal?
Is this Meteonelfilis? Oh! Parastella, Crystallis, Genwal? Oh my! Meteonelfilis?
Genwal Meteonelfilis fights Kirby, loses, becomes very big, loses again, then tries to take out Kirby in a last-ditch effort in this eyeball form, but is finally defeated and resealed by the Starries, who wave goodbye as they take him back up into space. Elfilin comments that he felt like he was once wrapped up in the embrace of the Starries too, and that might be why only he could understand them. He hopes that the Starries can travel the galaxy freely now, and that's pretty much it except for the Ultimate Cup ZX, which we'll get to later because what's going on there is kinda complicated. Now this is a Kirby game, so to fill in some of the gaps we need to do a little bit of reading, which in Forgotten Land can be found in the figurine descriptions. Don't worry, only a few are story relevant or even have any text at all. The starry figures describe them as children which cross both time and space in the distant past, but upon finding the planet-destroying meteor, they turn themselves into crystal in order to seal it, becoming planetary guardians. Although the crystals that make up the pieces of the heart itself are stated to be the transformed starries, it's important to note that it seems like whatever crystal magic is involved has the power to generate more crystals, even without using the starries' bodies, since a lot of the crystals generated from the comets, such as the starry flowers, still remain on the planet even after saving all the starries. The Galactal figure explains that this new enemy is actually created from Genwal's own body to destroy the starries in Kirby, and indeed we see the purple goo that makes up Genwal's incomplete form congealing into the shape of the Galactal body before crystals attach to it, and once the crystals are shattered, we can see its pupil looks similar to Genwal's. It's notable how these crystals immediately form a seal around Galactal every time it spawns, mirroring how the starries seal Genwal himself inside the meteor. Could this be something like the starries attempting to seal the pieces of Genwal that have escaped? Possibly, but as far as I'm aware, no text in the game outright confirms this. The meteor figures describe how the legend of the meteor has been passed down as a poem through the ages, telling of a future meteor which can sink continents or wipe out all life. It is specified that the meteor was supposed to land on the planet's last continent, which is probably the one with the plains area that Forgotten Land starts off in according to the Japanese description, before the starries threw it off course, creating a volcano where it happened to hit the ocean. But why did the meteor arrive in the first place? Well, to answer this, we need to look at the figures featuring Genwal Meteonelfilis himself, which reveal that he is the brother of Elfilis, both of them being part of the same invasive species which absorbs materials to become perfect life forms, and both being born in a distant corner of the galaxy. It's even stated that Genwal followed Fecto to this planet after seeing his failure, presumably this being when Fecto was captured by the natives and branded ID F86 for experimentation. There's also an interesting line here about how Genwal took a more advanced form by absorbing the starries. I would interpret this to mean that all the crystal magic we see Genwal use in his boss fight is likely a direct result of him absorbing the starries before the battle. After all, we know that the starries are responsible for the crystallization magic we see throughout the new levels, and we have precedents for the Elfilis species absorbing other creatures to become more powerful, as we see Fecto do this too. Now in the base game of Forgotten Land, we were never really given a clear explanation for why the Ancients left the planet, just that they studied Elfilis, a creature with powerful psychic and spatial teleportation abilities, and used it to develop technology that they used to leave. Fortunately, the first huge detail that's given to us by these figures is a plausible explanation for why they would want to do that. It turns out, not only does the legend describe the meteor as having the ability to sink islands, but it's explicitly stated that the people of the Forgotten Land only started to think the legend might be true after the discovery of ID F86 and the sinking of the islands. Meaning, islands began sinking only around the time the Ancients discovered Fecto, and you'll remember from the base game this was shortly after he arrived on the planet. I'd argue all of this along with Elfilin's mention of being wrapped in the embrace of the starries in the distant past too, which could have only been when he was a part of Elfilis, considering that he was only separated from Elfilis 30 years after the Ancients captured him, heavily implies that Elfilis arrived at the Forgotten Land in a meteor that was once sealed by starries, just like his older brother would much later, with this first meteor impact triggering the sinking of the continents of the Forgotten Land as the legend describes, which then drives the Ancients to use Fecto to develop technology to leave the planet altogether. Look closely at how this is phrased. Why would discovering Elfilis make the legend about a meteor seem more true? It has to be because Elfilis arrived in a meteor that began to sink continents. Now this last point gets a little speculative, but I've also seen it pointed out that when Genwal's meteor lands, it creates a volcano, and the location of Lab Discovera, where Fecto was captured soon after arriving, happens to be on a volcano. Is this a coincidence, or is creating volcanoes just a thing Elfilis meteors can do? Who knows? The sinking continents theory is also great because it provides an explanation for why that mysterious facility at the end of Star-Crossed World was under the ocean until Fallen Star Volcano was created. That's right, I said we would come back to it, and we're coming back to it now because these broken pods are huge. I mean, just look at the size of them compared to Kirby. But seriously, I mean huge for the lore. These are the Spaceship New World prototypes, said to be capable of warping to other galaxies, I imagine by harnessing the same sort of portal ability that Elfilis has. The text on the side of it translates to the Spaceship New World Type 01, again emphasizing this was one of the first types of these spaceships the Ancients developed. It's also mentioned that the theme park Wondaria and a special song were used to make travelers feel safe. I'm honestly not entirely sure what the first part of this means. I doubt it means that the entire theme park was constructed to normalize the idea of going to space or something, especially since we know it's themed after the stories about two dogs exploring space the founder wrote. So I think it might mean that the spaceships were actually launched at or around Wondaria, possibly hinted at by this graffiti you can find in the stage Crossing Wondaria, which translates to See You in the New World, with a sketch that looks like the prototype ship. The special song most likely refers to the main theme of the expansion, Twinkling Star Showers, a song about the legend and ships flying to the stars. We can see it advertised on these billboards around the new levels, and we are told it debuted on the same day the ships left the planet. This song, along with Welcome to the New World from the base game, are both contextualized as in-universe songs that existed in the civilization of the Forgotten Land, performed by a singer under the stage name Nachel. These figures of the billboards give us a ton of new info about her, including how no one could decipher the legend of the meteor until she had a breakthrough in a dream, and that she was actually one of the people who chose to remain on the planet rather than leave on the ships. The full text of the billboard reads Nachel, Twinkling Star Showers, 325, New Releases. The legend of meteors is brought back to life in the modern era with Nachel's voice. Of course, March 25 is the day that Forgotten Land released in real life, so I guess the in-game day the ships launched is a meta-reference to that. Alright, you know what? I think at this point we have enough information for me to bring out the first theory. This is one I've decided to call the Elfilis time loop theory, and I've got to give credit for this to RHV Gamer, who was the first guy I saw formulate it, but I've got a few more details to flesh it out past this initial Reddit comment. You remember how Elfilin has some dialogue at the end of Star-Crossed World implying that he was sealed by the Starries when he was a part of Meteonelfilis? Well, it turns out that he elaborates on this in some missable dialogue if you talk to him later in Kirby's house. Kirby, I remembered something during our recent adventures, something about myself from when I was trapped inside Elfilis. A while ago, I heard a mysterious song coming from this planet. Elfilis was drawn to it too. The singer's voice sounded kind and full of hope, but there was also some sadness to the music. It had a profound effect on me. There was something so mysterious about that voice traversing time and space. Obviously, the only singer this could be is Nachel, whose songs were explicitly told echo across the galaxy, playing both from the ships themselves and from the hangar. But hold on, this doesn't make any sense. Twinkling Star Showers is only released on the day the spaceships leave, the same spaceships which were developed by studying Meteonelfilis after capturing him, which only happens after Fecto arrives at the Forgotten Land in the first place. So there's no way Elfilin could have heard this song with Elfilis before coming to the planet, right? Well, what if I told you there's one key detail that instantly solves this apparent contradiction? That's right, it's the biggest lore drop in the entire expansion, the truth about a piece of technology we've already mentioned. The spaceship New World prototypes we see in the underground facility of the final level, the same prototypes of the spaceships that the inhabitants of the Forgotten Land used to fly to the stars in search of, well, a new world, are none other than the early versions of the Lore Starcutter itself, the ancient vessel Magalore found abandoned on Halkandra in Return to Dreamland. Okay, fine, if you saw any video about Star-Crossed World before this one, you probably already heard this, but in case you're unfamiliar, notice that the cockpit of the Lore has the exact same shape and design as the spaceship New World, down to the window design and placement, which is probably too specific to not be an intentional choice by the developers. If you need more evidence, the interdimensional portals that the lore opens to teleport across space both look and function a lot like the ones Fecto Forgo can make, having this star-shaped visual, and seeming to operate by pulling you through another dimension before actually spitting you out at your destination. Obligatory clarification, another dimension is literally the name given to a specific dimension that exists in the Kirby universe. It sort of acts as a nexus that allows for interdimensional travel, as shown in this diagram here. Although sadly for whatever reason it was given the most confusing name possible. Because, you know, the Dream Kingdom is also in another dimension relative to Kirby's, but that place is just called the Dream Kingdom, not another dimension, capital A, capital D. So just know that for this video, when I use the phrase another dimension, which I'm gonna have to do in a bit here, I always mean this specific dimension, which we sometimes see Kirby travel to, like for the final boss fight of Return to Dreamland. Okay, back to the prototype spaceship. If even that's not enough proof, this beeping sound effect associated with the lore in Return to Dreamland shows up again at the end of Nachel's unfinished track, a secret song you can unlock for 100%ing Star-Crossed World, which is a song about how the singer wants to teleport and travel across the universe. This right here is the main link between Forgotten Land and the rest of the series, but the reason it's important for our time loop dilemma is because the lore has the ability to travel through time, specifically because it travels around by opening passageways through another dimension. Something I think a lot of people don't really appreciate about another dimension is that it can basically take you anywhere, including to different times and dimensions. Literally, to quote Kumazaki himself, another dimension transcends time and space. And when talking about the lore Starcutter specifically, he says, "This craft is capable of traversing space and time, so a meeting of two lore Starcutters from different times is certainly possible." So if it is the case that the lore Starcutter comes from the same ships that the Ancients used to leave the Forgotten Land, meaning it's either the same model or a later version of one, it's totally plausible that these ships have the ability to travel through time too. Combine this with the fact that the song was playing from the ships themselves, and we have our answer. Elfilis Time Loop proposes that after the ship's launch and the song is released, using the time travel technology, the song, along with the ships, travel to some point in the past when Elfilis is still somewhere in space, probably sealed by the Starries. After time traveling, the radio waves eventually reach Elfilis with Elfilin inside, hence why the song is described as traversing time and space. Elfilis is drawn to the planet by the song and probably crashes down as a meteor, begins attacking native wildlife, then gets captured by the Ancients. After many years of studying him and also kinda turning him into a tourist attraction, the Ancients harness his teleportation powers and build it into ships that they can use to leave the planet as continents began to sink into the ocean soon after the meteor struck. Inspired by a dream about the legend of the meteor, Nachel sings Twinkling Star Showers, which is set to debut the day the ships developed using Elfilis leave, of course playing the song on board and completing the time loop. Now you might think this theory seems kinda weird since we have two events that basically cause each other. The song inspired by the prophecy of the meteor arrival traveling back in time causes Elfilis to arrive, and indirectly, Elfilis arriving causes the song to travel back in time. But I mean, that's just the sort of thing that happens when you introduce time travel to your world. As far as I can tell, the theory I'm presenting here is totally logically consistent, and hey, if it's true, then talk about a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, time to finish off the other new content in Star-Crossed World, the Ultimate Cup ZX. You might have noticed I've been putting this off for a while, and the reason for this is, unfortunately, since we're talking about the side modes, we need to briefly go over canonicity in Kirby games, just to hopefully avoid some of the debate and confusion that will inevitably show up. You see, when people on the internet talk about Kirby lore, or any video game lore really, they like to talk about what is or isn't canon, meaning what is officially true and what events actually happen in the narrative of the games, as opposed to stuff like fanfiction or headcanon. The reason this is a bit tricky with Kirby specifically is that Kumazaki has stated on multiple occasions in interviews that there's no definitive timeline for the Kirby series, meaning presumably that there's no official order that the games or game modes take place in. Obviously, this makes talking about Kirby canon a bit different from talking about other game series which do have a confirmed timeline and events that happen at particular dates. But does this mean we can't say anything about the Kirby universe or that every theory is as well grounded as every other theory? No, Kumazaki clarifies that there are definite facts which stay true, which he notes is sort of a necessity to not have to reintroduce all the characters to each other every game, and that new games inherit story elements from old ones. This suggests Kirby games do have a form of continuity to them. Certain facts are true and stay true between games. And we can see this in the games themselves. At the end of Revenge of Meta Knight, the halberd sinks into the ocean, and we don't see it again until Squeak Squad, where we come across it still underwater. In Star Allies, the Watch of Stardream can be found floating around in space, a nod to the battle at the end of Planet Robobot. So we can still say that someone's more or less correct when they make a claim about what happens in Kirby. but the issue gets even more complicated by the side modes. You see, a lot of Kirby games have side modes, which can be pretty much anything, a simple minigame, a whole new genre, or replaying the same game again with some new twist. And of course the boss endurance mode, which has been in every mainline game since Adventure in some form. For a long time, the biggest side modes were retellings of the main story, potentially with a new final boss, like Meta Nightmare or DDD Tour. Let's take Planet Robobot for example. In Meta Nightmare Returns, Haltman invades Popstar, but instead of being captured like he is in the main story, Meta Knight survives the initial attack and goes through the whole game like Kirby, fighting harder versions of the normal bosses. Only at the end does the plot suddenly deviate, resulting in Galactonite being the final boss instead of Stardream. Obviously, it's hard to imagine this is all supposed to happen in the same universe where Kirby saves the world. It can't both be true that Meta Knight is and isn't captured, or that Stardream is and isn't attacked by Galactonite. Fortunately, when asked about this directly, Kumazaki again clarified that this is a what-if scenario, along with the true arena of Robobot, meaning it shows something that could have happened, but didn't. Also, while it's on screen, I have no idea what Kumazaki's talking about here when he says we should consider the 3 stages where Galactonite appears. If you know what the heck he's talking about, please tell me at once by any means necessary. But while some of these modes are what-if scenarios, that's not the case for all of them. There's a recent trend in Kirby games towards making the extra modes direct sequels to the main story that continue off the end of the main game. This culminated in Forgotten Land, where literally everything, even the extra mini-games, soundtrack, and theater, are contextualized in the world of Kirby as parts of Waddle Dee Town. The post-game, Forgo Dreams, directly continues the main story, as Fecto Forgo retreats into a world created by his own psychic powers, now just a soul after Kirby destroyed his body. All of the phantom bosses we fight throughout the mode are even stated to explicitly be illusions created from Fecto's memories of the real characters they imitate. The Ultimate Cup Z is also suggested to be a psychic projection, as described here by the announcer D, created after Fecto escaped from the defeat of Morpho Knight, all while figure descriptions continue to narrate these events for anyone to clarify what's happening. So it looks like there's good reason to think that all of these modes actually happen, and therefore are probably canon. Is the Meta Knight Cup canon? Well, it seems at least possible. There's nothing stopping Kirby from fighting all of these characters again. It wouldn't be directly connected to the main story, but that's not really an issue. Is the original Ultimate Cup canon? Well, this doesn't really seem possible. Not only would DDD have to be repossessed, but somehow Fecto Forgo would have to return again, and recombine into Elfilis, and there's just no way for these events to happen exactly the same way again, especially since the main story, Forgo Dreams, and Ultimate Cup Z all pretty much run directly into each other. All this is to say, the general opinion I saw after Forgotten Land initially released and the community had some time to play through it was, the main story, Forgo Dreams, and Ultimate Cup Z were all canon, the Meta Knight Cup, sure, maybe, and Ultimate Cup, probably not. So this is what we're building on when we ask, is Ultimate Cup ZX canon? Well, it's pretty much the exact same thing as Ultimate Cup Z, except now Genwal shows up, and Elfilis steals his spear, which we did see left behind after the boss fight with Genwal in Star-Crossed World.
We do have one figure which directly explains what's happening here. By grasping the other crystal spear Meteonelfilis left behind, they were able to gain the power of the Starries and become the ultimate Lord of Chaos. And the Japanese text even adds the detail that Elfilis crossed dimensions to get this spear. But it seems pretty impossible for both of these cups to happen, since at the end of both of them Elfilis is pretty definitively defeated, and even in the same way. Quote, the last bit of life that remained willingly returned to Elfilin. At last, two became one. Of course, some previous modes with lore text were what-if scenarios. So at first I thought maybe Ultimate Cup Z shows what happens if the arena battles happen before Star-Crossed World's ending, in which case Elfilis can't get Genwal's spear, and just uses whatever powers he has from the souls he absorbed plus Morpho Knight. And ZX shows what happens if the arena battles take place after all of Star-Crossed World, so Chaos Elfilis is able to take the spear from the Fallen Star Volcano, and then show up in his Lord of Chaos form in the Colosseum.
But then I thought a bit more about that crossing dimensions line.
Why would he need to cross dimensions to get the spear, which is obviously in the same dimension he is, since you fight Genwal in the Forgotten Land? If the Ultimate Cup ZX happens after the Genwal fight, he could just go over to the volcano and grab it.
But if the fight happens before Genwal, then the only way he can get the spear is through some more time travel magic, which he could probably do using his spatial teleportation abilities, since those appear to open portals to another dimension which transcends time and space.
If this is correct, it gives us the set order of the main story, Forgo Dreams, the events at the Colosseum, and then the Star-Crossed World ending. But I guess you still don't know if Z or ZX is canon. It just boils down to, did he cross dimensions to get the spear or not? Maybe for now we could prefer ZX due to it being the most recent version of events, but since neither takes place in the main game itself, both of them being optional side modes, I think the only way we solve this is if a future game comes back to the events of Forgotten Land and confirms one of these two possibilities, which sadly might be pretty unlikely. Okay, well, that's everything in Star-Crossed World. What else was I supposed to talk about? Oh yeah. Okay, so here's why I really wanted to make this video. If this prototype confirms that the ancients that lived in the Forgotten Land are the same ones that built the lore Starcutter, then it follows that all the things we know about the ancients associated with the lore in previous games applies to the Forgotten Land ancients, since they're the same guys. Return to Dreamland actually gives us a decent amount of information about the ancients, mostly told through Magalore and pause screens. To review, in that game, Magalore learns about the Master Crown through an old book, although it sounded like a fairy tale until he found the lore on Halcondra. Magalore tells Kirby that he excavated and repaired the lore from the volcano where Landia dwells, and crucially that it's a legendary vessel crafted by the ancients, that an incredible power was used to construct it, and that the same power was used to make other legendary creations, like clockwork stars, items that bring dreams to life, and the Master Crown itself. With Forgotten Land in mind, it's not crazy to propose that this incredible power is retroactively a reference to Elfilis. I mentioned earlier that the lore can open portals similar to Elfilis, but we also see the Master Crown give Magalore the exact same powers, which makes sense if they both share the same source. Even outside of direct text, there's a ton of environmental details that tell us a lot more that no one ever even talks about. For example, I've never seen anyone talk about how the lore has its own language used by its computer. You can see these characters on the keyboard, scrolling along the bottom of the screen, and labeling a couple of diagrams every once in a while. As far as I'm aware, it isn't a cipher for anything like the Forgotten Land language, but if the lore originates from there, this could be a slightly different language derived from the one in Forgotten Land. It's got a similar sort of blocky design to it. Also, the lore isn't the only sign of civilization on Halcondra. Egg Engines consists entirely of these artificial structures that seem to make up a futuristic city in the background, with levels even featuring factories and whole sewer systems. If the lore being left here indicates that at some point ancients from Forgotten Land landed on Halcondra, then it makes sense to assume they were probably the ones who built all this stuff. It gets even more interesting when you look at the Master Crown fight in Magalore Epilogue. Ever since this boss fight, I've wondered what the heck is going on in the background, which is just sort of suddenly transitioned to after fighting Crown Doomer. It looks like a restored version of the city in the background of Egg Engines, but with this red sky with fire raining down. It would be weird for the developers to just randomly reuse these assets in a brand new side mode. Why make this the final boss background against Master Crown? Well, I'd propose that, similar to the prototype, this is a hint at what actually happened to the ancients, now on Halcondra. Remember, this planet also has a volcano, which is pretty close to Egg Engines, and this looks a lot like it's showing a volcanic eruption over the city of Halcondra in the past. Why show this with the Master Crown? Well, we can only guess, but we know it was probably an artifact that the ancients created, and we know the Master Crown caused a lot of bad stuff, having had many previous hosts. So it might be the case that the Master Crown itself caused this calamity. Since this involves some speculation beyond what we directly see in the game, this is just a theory, which we can give a name like Crown Calamity Theory or something for later reference. But if true, man do these guys have bad luck with volcanoes. Don't build your ancient techno-utopia next to an active volcano. That's the lesson of the Kirby series. Now you might be saying, well, alright, there are a couple of interesting connections you can make between games here, but what's your point? The only solid evidence we have are all pretty vague environmental details. Outside of that, there's no confirmed narrative here. Well, one thing I'm trying to demonstrate is how, even with no given timeline, anyone can still create a theory about the lore which isn't just completely made up, and you can argue is more or less correct based on how much it fits the clues we see in the series. The Kirby series does its world building often through these seemingly insignificant background details that together can be combined, with some imagination from the player, into a wider story. This is what the Elfilis time loop and Crown Calamity theories I developed for this video do, and this is what I wish a lot of other Kirby theories would also try and do. But look, that's why I'm here. I promised at the beginning I'd tie Star-Crossed World to forces that cause all the major events in the series, and I'll make good on that now.
And it's pretty straightforward too. Remember the other creations the Ancients Magalore mentions? These pretty specific descriptions of clockwork stars and items that bring dreams to life are typically thought to be references to galactic nova and the Star Rod, which would tie us to Superstar and Adventure directly, and indirectly to Robobot as well. Nova is a planet-sized clockwork machine, and the Star Rod has the power to send good dreams to the inhabitants of Dreamland through the Dream Fountain, which matches Magalore's description of mysterious items that bring forth dreams from his Japanese text pretty well. Even ignoring the twist reveal at the final boss of Robobot, Haltman says that his company found and reactivated Stardream by analyzing the most advanced civilizations in the universe. And Stardream also opens a star-shaped portal which he uses to summon Galactonite, which is again described by the developers as transcending space-time, just like the lore and just like another dimension. Since we see another dimension used to teleport across long distances several times in the series, it's not implausible this is how Stardream's fetching Galactonite to test Meta Knight as well.
Also, no discussion of Robobot would be complete without mentioning the security force drones Haltman uses within the Access arc, which are pretty blatant ripoffs of Metal Genwal, the boss of Egg Engines whose master is directly noted as being long dead, down to having most of the same attacks and animations. This is perhaps the most direct evidence that Haltman Works has stolen and repurposed technology from the Ancients we've been talking about, if this wasn't good enough already.
Now it's a bit more difficult to tie things directly to Star Allies, but in his giant rant at the end of the game, Highness implies that his clan of magic users was driven to the ends of the galaxy and nearly erased from history by a group of science wielders. Given that a lot of the achievements of the Ancients we know about are these powerful machines, some have suggested that this is another reference to the same group that left the Forgotten Land and built the lore.
And of course, the Mimic Crown's Void Termina summons during his boss fight are worth a shout out. Not really sure what the connection is there, but there is a connection. Anyway, if that theory is correct, it means the Ancients have a hand in causing the events of Adventure,
Milky Way Wishes, and Robobot by creating artifacts that all of the major villains try to use to carry out their evil schemes, and in Star Allies by unintentionally creating the Jimvandra cult, which would later try to revive Void Termina. At this point, the only major games left are the ones that have to do with dark matter stuff and mirror world stuff, but if you can link those concepts to the Ancients, that's pretty much every mainline game. I've seen some people make these connections in isolation here and there on the internet, but I've never seen anyone tie everything into one ultimate theory. One theory that explains most of the events that actually happen in the series and how they relate to the lore we get. Just like how the events we see Kirby go through in Return to Dreamland only happen because of what the Ancients did on Halkandra long ago. One theory that neatly organizes all of the events we see play out across different dimensions, and one theory that explains the biggest question I haven't even discussed yet. Where did the Ancients go? But that's going to have to be saved for another video since this one's already gone on longer than I thought it would, again.
I hope this video wasn't too hard to follow even if you haven't played all the games I talked about. I had to move kinda quickly since there's a lot of thoughts I've been wanting to talk about for a while, so I had to cut out some stuff just to keep the video concise. For example, here's one more bonus theory. Since time travel exists, it's totally possible that the lore Starcutter from Halkandra is actually older than the prototype from our perspective, even though it was built later, if the Ancients traveled back in time before reaching Halkandra.
Like, how did the Ancients develop a new language and build a whole civilization, as well as create all these magic technologies in only the time it took for the Forgotten Land to get kind of overgrown? You'd think the city would be in way worse shape from weather and natural disasters or something, but yeah, it's not an issue if you just say, yeah, they time traveled. So remember to like and subscribe to the channel if you're interested in future theories. I've got a couple of original ones. I might also do an analysis of some of the more popular theories, give my take on those, and talk about other things I like in these games too. And don't forget to give me your thoughts in the comments below. I'll ask the same thing as my prediction video. Do you think I'm right? Do you think I'm wrong? Is there something I completely missed that blows these theories up? I'd like to know.
I can't help but feel like there's something I'm forgetting.
Oh, right. The fiend the Starries once crystallized who was capable of destroying the entire galaxy might be Galactonite, since the phrase that's used in the Japanese text is the same as a phrase that was used to refer to him in Robobot. That's pretty much all I've got. I was serious about that Galactonite thing too. If you have any idea what this means, comment that as well. Why the heck did everyone think he was going to show up in Starcrossed World?